And that's it for this week Lotus Lowdown. Thank you for watching us today, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us for another Lotus Lowdown episode. As always, I'm your host Tom. Thank you for watching us, and we'll see you next week. Bye. And that concludes this episode of the Lotus Lowdown. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next week. That is all for this. This is the Lotus Lowdown. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you for showing up for this week's The Lotus Lowdown. We hope to see you next week. That is all for this week's Lotus Lowdown. Thank you for showing us, and we'll see you next time. That is it for this week's Lotus Lowdown. Thank you for showing us, and we'll see you next time. Very good, Surfing. You made it to the end of the video. Thank you for showing us on this Halloween night, and we'll see you next time. And that is all for this week Lotus Lowdown. Thank you for showing us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for showing up for this week's Lotus Lowdown, and we'll see you next week. And that is it for this week's edition of the Lotus Lowdown. We hope you enjoyed your time here, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for showing up for this week's Lotus Lowdown, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for showing up for this week's Lotus Lowdown, and we will see you next week. Thank you for showing up on this week's Lotus Lowdown, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you for showing up for this week. This is the Lotus Lowdown, and we hope to see you next week. Had a lot of fun here today, but I want to take a moment to be serious if I can. If you are loving or suffering from symptoms of mental illness, get help. There's no shame in asking for help. Use the resources in your community to look for that help. And remember, just because you have an illness, it doesn't define you. It's been the Lotus Lowdown, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for showing up for this week's Lotus Lowdown. We're glad you brought us into your home this holiday season. And until next time, all I have left to say is, we wish you Merry Christmas, we wish you Merry Christmas, we wish you Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us for this week Lotus Lowdown, and thank you for being a subscriber and a fan. We at Lotus Clubhouse appreciate your viewership, your engagements, and your shares. And we'll see you all next week. You won't want to miss it. Bye. Thank you for showing up for this week Lotus Lowdown, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you for showing up for this week's edition of the Lotus Lowdown. Thank you for being a fan, and we hope to see you next week.
Thanks for showing up this week, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Alright, that is all for the Lotus Lowdown. Where did everybody go? Like, there was like so many people, and now they're gone. It's just me. But bye.
Thank you for showing up for this week Lowdown. We hope to see you next time. And until then, remember this very important rule. Don't touch my clipboard. Bye. Thank you for showing up for this week of the Lotus Lowdown. And I want to say something before we leave. Don't let your mental health define you or dictate what you can do. Just because you have a mental health doesn't mean you can't contribute to society. Me, for example, I make videos like these. I've written books and all sorts of different stuff. I contribute it back to the world, and I feel pretty good about it. And you can do the same, whether your gift is making a piece of artwork, writing, poetry, illustration, singing, dancing, making music. You can contribute something to society that is just as good as anything else, with or without a mental illness. Thank you for showing up, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for showing up for this week. This is the Lowdown, and we hope to see you next week. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you for watching the Lotus Lowdown. See you next week. We'll be here waiting for you.
Thank you for showing up for this week Lotus Lowdown. We hope to see you next week. Bye. Before you go, be sure to know you always belong. You matter. You are worth it. You are doing great. You are loved. You can do anything. You have a voice. I believe in you. Thank you for showing the Lotus Lowdown, and we'll see you next time. Bye.